Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma 221 here, back in today to talk about Kagurabachi, chapter number 66. This chapter is titled Truth. And to tell all of you viewers the truth, this may actually be the latest I have ever recorded a video like ever in my life. Now, that may not be 100% the truth, but I think it's pretty damn close to, because currently it is 9:45 on Valentine's Day, February 14th, whenever I am sitting down to record this good old Kagurabachi chapter review. And normally whenever I record Kagurabachi videos, or really any of my videos in general, they are normally done like earlier in the morning. Like, I don't think many of my videos have been filmed like past the timestamp of like 3 o'clock. Like, I am a very like record some videos early in the morning, or like maybe later in the afternoon around like maybe 5 or something, depending on like what my day schedule is looking like. And then later sit down and like edit the video at night and all that sort of thing. So just sitting down, like I've been watching like Dr. Stone all day. I absolutely love and adore Dr. Stone. Went back and read like a few chapters of it too. I don't know why. I was just like, I'm more like the Dr. Stone kick right now, and like I was so happy. I'm like, you know what I just want to do now? Like, I've had a great day so far. Let's talk about Kagurabachi and make the day even better. And honestly, we get a lot of really cool information in this chapter, not only about Iori, with of course all of her story relating to Samura, as of course we've been building up to for a good amount of chapters now, but we also get a lot of information on the Seitei War and the island, and like how the Seitei War came to be, which is like a lot of really interesting lore dump that I was not expecting us to get for at least a long while in Kagurabachi. And to get like this, like almost out of nowhere, almost like really awesome chapter of Kagurabachi we got here, and I'm really excited to sit down and talk about this one today. But of course, before we hop into chapter number 66, we need to talk about what happened last time in chapter number 65. And really what happened there was we got a few details on the EI White Purity style that of course Chihiro is trying to learn and master after he sort of came to the realization that, hey, I cannot fight with a sword at all, and that is a problem. We got the end of the conflict between him and Kagiri, at least for part 1 of their fight for now. Of course, I know what's happening in the next chapter of chapter number 67, and not to say that Kagiri comes back, but more fights start to occur in there. I'll just go ahead and say that much right now. So, a little bit of a fun thing was we got all of that, and then we eventually got introduced to the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel, who was owned by this guy named, or at least the general manager was this guy named Yojiro Sengoku, and we pretty much learned this is like the safe haven for all sorts of sorcerers and everything. Like, the walls are like imbued with this special barrier that prevents any like signals from getting in and out and all of this sort of stuff. And the big crux of the chapter there was like, hey, well, while we were in this hotel, Chihiro's like, hey, why don't we just tell Iori everything about her father so she at least knows the whole situation, and then if nobody can detect her in here, then, well, if she wants to go back to her normal life, the Masumi are preparing the seal. They'll be ready in 24 hours at about noon of the next day, so, like, why not just, like, tell her everything now? If she wants to go back to her life, then she very well can, but if she wants to stay with all of her memories, then I will be the one to protect her, and I will protect her either way. And that is pretty much the exact moment that we ended off last chapter on, was Chihiro's like, hey, in 24 hours, whether Iori wants to keep her memories or not, I am going to be training with the sword and get great at the EI White Purity style to be able to protect her at the end of the day. And that's where we ended off last chapter. And this chapter sort of starts off in it's like the same sort of area and timeline, but just like in a little bit of a different scene, as we start off with a little bit of narration from Iori, who is just going like, wow, it's not that I'm dissatisfied with my life. I mean, my life has been very peaceful and good, but all along I've had this vague sense of loneliness. As we of course just see her with her mother and all of her classmates just having a good time, like the whole idea of like she has had a great life, but also the image that we've always seen of her just holding Samura's hand, and like she doesn't understand what is really going on here, right? And we see here in the moment, Iori's just asking like, okay, so who is this Samura person to me? Who is this Seiichi Samura, right? And Chihiro's like, oh yeah, Samura is your father, right? And we see that Ro walks over for like a bag of potato chips or something in his hand. Actually, it's not a bag of potato chips. We see it's like a sandwich or like some bread or something like that he goes and hands over to Iori, and Iori sort of just like takes it in her hands, and she's just like, no, like it can't be, like I've never met my father, right? And she remembers Ro's whole thing of like, well, we manipulated your memories, and she's like, oh, maybe that was it, right? As we see that she like opens this thing up, and I honestly don't know what it is. Like, it looks like some sort of bread thing, like it's got the design on it, but she goes down and she eventually starts to eat it, and it really reminds me of, like, those early chapters of Kagurabachi whenever we were dealing with Char, which, like, where is Char and Hinao? We haven't seen them in so long. I love those two characters, and I want to see them again, right? But I guess that's the same thing of, like, where's Tafuku, and also, like, where's Hiyuki? Like, we haven't seen any of those in a while. Like, we know what's going on with Haruki. He is currently, like, trying to get his brain working again, but, like, where's he now? Where's Char? Where's Hiyuki? And where's Tafuku? Where are the characters I care about? And also, like, where's Shiba in this moment? But, like, whatever. Back to the chapter. Iori just eating this bread or whatever it is just really reminds me of Char, like, eating all of those sandwiches and all that stuff. And I also, recently, of course, being that Kagurabachi Volume 2 has come out over here in the States, I read through it here not too long ago, and honestly reminds me of the scene wherever Chihiro comes in and, like, brings Char the sandwich after he saves her from Sojo's lair and all that sort of stuff, and she just, like, bites down and eats it. It's a really cute and emotional scene, and while this scene isn't quite as emotional yet, we will be getting there. It is just really fun to see Iori, that's her name. We're keeping all of the, like, the miscuts in here, because this is a chapter titled Truth, alright? But just seeing her eat it, seeing Iori eat it, it sort of reminds me of that, right? Either way, Road just continues on like, yes, I know it's very confusing. You've lived with your dad when you were younger, but we made you forget him. Your current name and birth record are totally fake, and your real name is Iori Samura. And Iori's like, oh, what are you talking about? As we get what I presume to be, like, the nameplate of her house, of, like, her family name, and we see that for the longest time, Iori's been living under the name, Yoshiora, right? So, of course, like, we know her friends were calling her Iori, so her real name would be Iori Yoshiora, even though, of course, it is Iori Samura, is what we all know her as, of course, right? And we pretty much see that, Iori, in this moment, thinks back when Rose said, like, hey, we sealed your memory for your own safety, and she's like, hey, but why, how is it my safety to do this? As we see that Chihiro walks up in front of her and slips a piece of paper in front of her with the name Seiichi Samura written out on it, and we see that he writes it in, of course, the kanji, of course, with the hiragana, what is it called, like, romanji out on the side to, like, be able to fully read it, right? And Iori's like, oh, hey, I've seen that name before, right? And Chihiro says, oh yeah, you've probably heard of him. He was in your textbook at school. How much do you know about the Seitei War? I don't know if I'm saying that right, like Seitei, or is it Seit? Okay, it's A-I-U-E-O, so A-I, so it's Seitei War, the Seitei War. That is what I don't know, I've never actually, like, pronounced that word since, like, it's never been necessary in these reviews before, but, like, yeah, what do you know about the Seitei War, right? As we get a little bit of a cool lore drop, like I was saying earlier, as Chihiro just says, like, hey, 20 years ago, a small island called Shokoku appeared in the southeastern seas. As we get this image of, like, Japan here in this moment, like, the entire metropolis built of whatever town and cities this is, we see, like, a few boats just, like, sailing out. We see this massive heavy fog just, like, completely surrounding the entire, like, ocean. And we see this island, and we see just, like, some flakes almost saying, like, hey, it almost poofed into existence in this moment, right? As Chihiro just continues on in sort of a narration-like fashion, like, saying, like, hey. And along with it, Danseki, the raw material of the enchanted blades. That material originated there. The inhabitants of Shokoku were naturally immune to the Danseki. They could handle the unprocessed stone without their bodies exploding. Then the invasion began. 1 year and 5 months later, Kunishige Rokuhira forged the enchanted blades. It was the master swordsman and the wielder and the five wielders. Oh no, it was the master swordsman and five wielders of the enchanted blades who wiped out the enemy a year and 5 months after the invasion, which is, like, absolutely crazy, because, like, we now get a timeline of how this war worked. Kunishige literally forged the enchanted blades, and a month after he did, and within that month pretty much, the war was over, which is, like, absolutely insane for the destructive power of these blades. And, like, of course it makes sense why Kunishige wanted to hide them away, and why the Hishaku came and got them from Kunishige and all that sort of stuff. Like, really, it just shows you the destructive power of these blades. And also, in this panel where we see like the whole thing of like a year and 5 months later, we also see just a field of flowers, which doesn't really forebode well for the whole idea of what the Magatsumi or Shinichi blade is, of course, Kabanagi call it, and really what the Sword Master is like all about. Like, it's really builds up this anticipation of just seeing what only the Shinichi can do, or the Magatsumi, whatever you want to call it, and just seeing the raw power. It's just absolutely insane and crazy to think about, right? But Iori just is like, oh, so are you saying like one of those heroes was my father? As we get the image of this padlock chain again, of course, this padlock has 4 chains chained to it on each side. And we pretty much see that Road just says like, yes, he was. Of the 5, Mr. Samura possessed the fastest sword techniques, right? If someone wanted to leverage his lightning fast sword for their purposes, then as his daughter, you'd obviously make the ideal hostage. But if nobody knew that you were Samura's daughter, that risk could be eliminated. And to that end, Mr. Samura asked us to seal your memories, right? As we again get this look at the padlock, and last time we saw this padlock, which was what, chapter number 63, if I'm not mistaken. It was the chapter where we first really got introduced to Iori. Actually, let me just go check my YouTube studio real quick, because I literally named that video Breaking the Chains. Like, I know, so incredibly original, but hey, I thought it was a really funny and good title for the moment. Let's see what chapter that was. Good thing I already have this pulled up. Oh no, it's chapter 62, because yeah, 63 was the whole sword fighting thing. Yeah, okay. Chapter number 62, so it's been like 4 chapters since we last saw this padlock analogy, pretty much. And we see that one of the chains is crumbling. That was the whole point I was getting to there, right? And Iori just continues saying like, hey, I can't even remember his face. Seiichi Samura. And as she says the name, another one of the chains starts to break in this moment, as Iori has this little bit of a memory of drawing her father on a little piece of paper. And we then just see this image where she takes it up and says like, hey, look, Daddy, I drew you, right? And of course, being that Samura has blinded himself, it's like, oh, God, I can't see it, right? And Iori's like, oh, that's right. And we just see this little like bit of like a really cute moment between Iori and Samura, and like, man, I just absolutely love it. Iori just thinks like, oh, my dad. And she's like, oh, you guys keep calling him Mr. Samura like you know him. What's he doing? And like, where is he now, right? As we see that Road just says like, oh, he's forgotten you two. The Masumi were appointed to protect you if the need arose. Which is a little bit of an interesting thing, because it seems like written into the seal about all of this, Samura literally forgot about Iori, which is a little bit of an interesting thing to like, wow, I would have thought that, like, he would have remembered his daughter, but just like never thought about it. But no, knowing that he totally wiped his own daughter from his memory really shows how much he does care at the end of the day about making sure that she stayed protected, at least in the moment, right? And I guess that means that the only people who actually knew about it were the 3 members of the Masumi that are themselves, like Romoku and Sumi, so it checks out there, right? And Iori just thinks like, oh, but why would he abandon me? As she just thinks to herself like, right, all this time I wanted to remember. And she just thinks like, why? If he's so strong, why couldn't I stay with him? He could have like protected me, couldn't he? So why? As we see the lock in this moment even starts to crack, as we see it's like completely trying to break apart, as Iori just remembers the image of her holding her father's hand, as the lock starts to shatter even more and even more. And she just thinks like, oh, father, finally, as we see that she remembers the full picture of Samura holding Iori's hand. He's like, oh, Iori. And she's like, oh, father. As we see in this moment the full context of the scene around there, as we see that Iori is in a small schoolgirl, I was about to say costume, but it's just a uniform, so like she's put it on or anything, right? We see that she's in this schoolgirl uniform, and we see that she's holding her father's hand. And we also see their family home, this shrine of some sort of renown. And we see just written in what presumes to be blood or just like black ink on the walls. It's just graffiti saying like die, murder, drop dead, sinner, killer, get lost, as we see that this is right next to the house of the Samura family. And we even see a bunch of trash is piled up here, and there's even a crow going through and ripping the bags apart, eating it, which is like, oh no, a crow, and it's like, that's not good. Like, he uses Tobi Mune, crows, birds, like, oh my gosh. It's probably just some symbolism that Takeru Hokuzono wanted to throw in here. But we see at this moment, Iori has fully remembered everything. And the lock has completely shattered, right? As we see that Chihiro just says like, oh, the reason he gave you up wasn't because of the danger. And Ro just says like, hey, yes, he was known as a hero, but not everyone felt the same. And that would never go away, no matter how hard he fought to save people. As Iori has this flashback to whenever she first saw Chihiro last chapter, she's like, hey, they said you were a killer. And Ro just continues like, hey, your life as Seiichi Samura's daughter would have been a constant struggle. As we see that all of this starts to hit Iori, and she's like, oh my gosh, her heart starts to like pound, and she starts to just like see this crow in her mind, the crow that was there breaking open the trash bags in that little flashback of her as a child. And she just remembers the Rose whole thing of like, hey, and those memories won't necessarily be happy ones, of course, what he said last chapter. And Iori's heart just starts beating like ba-dump, 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 and just starts like throbbing back and forth as Iori just like crutches her head, and she starts to faint in the chair where she's currently sitting, and Chihiro and Ro both run over to make sure that Iori's all right. We then fast forward in time a little bit as we see that Iori is laying in a bed, and we see that Chihiro and Ro are both sitting now in the main room of the like Pine Room, which is a room that they're like stationed in the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel. And we see that Ro is just talking to Chihiro being like, hey, well, I mean, it's very understandable. Moments ago, she was a normal high school girl, and he's like, hey, she's confused, and it definitely is a lot to take in all at once, right? And Ro's just like, hey, and about her mother. And Chihiro's like, hey, no, we don't need to tell her. I still want her to have the option of going home. Her truth is a painful one, you know? And of course, the desire to live with the real truth, And of course, the desire to live with the truth is real, but the whitewashed, ordinary life she's been living is just as sacred, right? And she was like, hey, it is totally up to her. And like, hey, there's still time for her to process it. And our job is to stand by her. As we see that he grabs the katana on his side and like just like takes it out and like shoves it back in, and we just hear like the ka-shing sound effect. But we then cut up to the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel, 35th floor, as we see that both Moku and Sumi, this is where they've been this entire time, as Moku's like, oh man, well, it looks like we're going to be pulling an all-nighter up here, right? And Sumi's like, hey, well, this time we'll completely seal her memory of Mr. Samura. We'll have to write out everything about Iori. Now, a fun little note at this point in the Kagurabachi story is like, hey, of course, Viz is simulpublishing these chapters, and we have a little bit of a typo here in this chapter. It's a little funny, as we see that Iori is actually written instead of I-O-R-I, as it's normally been written. It's here written I-Y-O-R-I, which doesn't really change the pronunciation of it at all. It's still Iori, and it even sounds cool, Iori, but no, it's just Iori, and just a fun little thing of hey, oops, the translators accidentally made a little typo in here, which I don't even think it was the translators. I think it's just hey, we accidentally put a Y in here on accident. Oops, but that's really how it goes. And honestly, it may be a thing and now I'm actually sitting here thinking about it. Her name may have actually been Iori Samura spelled this way, and then just make sure she's got that extra level of protection. They left her with the name Iori, but then gave her the last name of, what was it that we saw earlier in the chapter? Yoshiora. So before it was Iori Samura spelled with a Y, and now it's Iori Yoshiora not spelled with a Y. That could just be a stupid little thing that I'm sitting here thinking of, but who knows? Maybe this translation wasn't just a mistake at the end of the day. Who really knows, right? But we see Moku just says hey, but why are we doing this on the rooftop, right? And we see that Sumi just says hey, well, it's because sorcery is prohibited inside. The inside of this hotel is packed with members of the underworld. It's the one it's one of the hotel's regulations to keep them from riling each other up. If we create a stir of thugs in the hotel will pounce, and that's not all. The hotel staff are disciples of Yojiro Sengoku, the general manager, and they're masters of the Reagan one-sword style. So hey, we don't want to get on their bad side. As we then get down to the first floor lobby of the Kyoto Bloodshed Hotel, as we see, of course, Yojiro Sengoku is standing here at his point at the desk, being the general head officer. And we then just see, sitting in one of the chairs in the general lobby, is none other than the Hishaku member Toto, whose name we learned last chapter. And we see that she pulls out her Hishaku-clad flame symbol hand, and we see that she's like flicks her 2 fingers, and we see that she summons Hiruhiko into where this room is right now, right? And we see that she not only uses sorcery, which is like, oh no, I thought this was prohibited, right? Which we will be getting to here in a brief second. Hiruhiko just says like, oh, hey, thanks, Toto. That surveillance was really intense, wasn't it, right? And Toto's like, hey, Samura will pick up the trail quickly. We'll have to do our best to be on our toes, right? And she's like, hey, absolutely no using the enchanted blade. You hear me, right? And Hiruhiko's like, hey, I won't. And he's like, see? And we see that he's got a little bit of a hairpin in his hand in this moment, right? And Toto's like, hey, a hairpin? Like, is that all you brought with you, right? And Hiruhiko doesn't particularly give a response. He says like, hey, so tell me this. Samura's daughter's in this building. Is that what you say, right? And Toto's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. There could be a few places she'd be hiding. So honestly, we just have to go through and we have to search, right? And she even makes a note of like, hey, Kogiri's also making the rounds around Kyoto trying to find her, right? As we see one of the staff members of the Bloodshed Hotel walks up and says like, oh, pardon me, sorcery is strictly forbidden within this hotel, don't you hear me, right? And in this moment, Hiruhiko comes through, and just with a hairpin, he murders this guy. He slits open his jugular, his head is barely on his face anymore, and yeah, we see that Hiruhiko is extremely dangerous with this hairpin. Also, I don't know if I mentioned this, I don't think I did, but Hiruhiko does have both arms back on his body completely. So, yeah, it's just like, yeah, Hiruhiko's got the arms back. Pretty dope right there, right? So I guess Hiruhiko isn't going to be like the, isn't going to be a Zoro with the one-sword style in his mouth using everything, right? And of course, this employee guy had a sword on him, so Hiruhiko goes through, grabs the sword in his hand, and just says like, hey, if I draw Kumayori, Samura will slay me instantly, because I know because I saw him with my own eyes. He's like, hey, I'll have to just rely on regular sword skills for now, right? And he's like, hey, have your tea, Toto, as we see that Toto's just like continuing to sit down where she was. As we see that Yojiro Sengoku is pulling out his sword behind a desk, of course, getting ready to use his Reagan one-sword style. And we see that Hiruhiko goes back, puts his all of his long hair into a little bit of a man bun, and shoves the bloody hairpin that he just murdered a guy with straight through the back of his hair. As he just says like, hey, the Bloodshed Hotel will be a good stepping stone. As we see that he gets the sword ready, and that is where we end this chapter of Kagurabachi, with Hiruhiko standing here, sword in his hand, and a really cool hairstyle. I'm not gonna lie, I love Hiruhiko's hairstyle that they're rocking right now. It looks so incredibly cool. Remember when we all thought that Hiruhiko was a woman? I remember there were plenty of chapter reviews where I'm like, oh yeah, Hiruhiko, she, and now we know that Hiruhiko's just a he, but like, man, it's... You guys ever thought about that? Like, that was like, what? Chapter, like, 40? No, it was like, it was like chapter number 44. I actually still have all my Kagurabachi videos open on my YouTube studios. Let me scroll through them. Yeah, no, it was chapter number 48. That was a chapter title, or that was a chapter review I named A New Challenger Approaches. And we had, of course, Origami vs. Sword, which I think Origami vs. Sword was my best viewed Kagurabachi video to date. Yeah, because it got like 143 views, so that was pretty neat right there. But either way, great chapter of Kagurabachi we had this week. Just a lot of really hype and really interesting stuff. Not only do we get like more development of Iori, she finally realizes everything about her father, And she finally realizes that the reason her Samura wanted, or Seiichi, I guess I should be saying, but like Seiichi Samura, the reason that he wanted to forget Iori and have Iori forget him is not because that like she would be in danger, because of course he could protect her. It was more of the fact that he wanted to make sure that she wasn't looked down upon for simply being his daughter, which is a really sweet thing, even if we do know that Samura may not be as much of a stand-up guy as we've been currently seeing, which is a really interesting sort of thing here. Of course, we now know more about the Kagurabachi universe and about the Seitei War. Of course, the whole idea of this island called Shokoku. That's where the Danseki comes from, and I guess what happened is maybe this island disappeared, or maybe the island is still there, and Danseki was a raw material resource on it. We don't 100% know, because I'm pretty sure in volumes 1 or 2 of Kagurabachi, whenever I was rereading them, it was specifically said that only a select amount of Danseki still exists in the world, or like there's only this much to begin with. So a little bit of a cool thing, but also knowing that like the inhabitants of the Shokoku Island are the ones that ended up going and actually attacking to begin with. More interesting stuff. And of course, being that they are naturally immune to Danseki, they can use it to get their insane powers, like of course who we are seeing now. Which also begs the question of, when are we going to see a few survivors from down to Shokoku? It's going to happen at some point. I mean, who knows, maybe like one of them has got the ability to like bring people back from dead, and they're going to bring back Sojo or something. That'd be pretty cool. But like, we've got to be seeing one of these people at some point, because that's like all that really makes sense. And also, as I touched on earlier, like the whole idea of like 1 year and 5 months later, Kunishige Rokuhira forged the Enchanted Blades, and 1 year and 5 months after the invasion, it was over. So like the battle didn't even last any major amount of time, which really leads us to believe that all of the wielders of the Enchanted Blades to begin with, they got that time very early on, and that was really all there was to it, right? So pretty cool stuff there. Again, all the Iori stuff. And then it's like, okay, downstairs we learned the whole idea of like, hey, you cannot practice sorcery in here. Oh no, Toto is using sorcery. Oh no, Hiruhiko's here. Oh no, Hiruhiko's murdered a man and looks like he's about to murder more. And that's where we cut chapter. So really a fun chapter of Kagurabachi. And man, Hiruhiko, that haircut you got right now, that style, oh man, and the bloody hairpin, oh, it looks so incredibly cool. I've got to give it to Hiruhiko. It looks dope as hell. But yeah, with that, thank you guys so very much for watching this video on Kagurabachi chapter number 66. Again, this chapter was titled Truth because, of course, Iori now knows the truth. I do plenty of other anime and manga related content on the YouTube channel. Recently, it's just been a lot of weekly Shonen Jump related stuff, not only getting like making a whole bunch of videos that I recorded like a month ago and like finally putting them out now, but also just doing like some other Kagurabachi related stuff. So I promise I'll be getting to all the anime and stuff soon. Like, hey, before next season of Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku finishes up, need to redo that. I've got like the Link Click series. Also, before Bleach completely wraps up with the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, I've got like 2 cores of that to cover. So I've got plenty of anime I also want to cover. So don't worry, all of the anime stuff will be coming back at some point, even though it is very hard to do it very frequently. But yeah, of course, I do plenty of our Kagurabachi chapter reviews, so if you want to check out any of those, I will not only have a playlist linked in the description box down below, but as an end card on the video, and also you can just go to my YouTube channel and just like check out all the things that Glowplasma has to offer. So that's really all there's there. Yeah, I'll be seeing you guys next time for Kagurabachi chapter number 66, and until then, I'll catch you guys then. Again, this was chapter number, or I'll be catching you guys for chapter number 67. This was chapter number 66, titled Truth. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next time. This will be Glowplasma 231, signing out. Thanks for watching, Bachi Bros. I always value you guys just like sitting down and watching these fun videos. But yeah, I'll catch you guys later. Bye.